Hello everyone and welcome to our online worship. It is August 28th. Today we have a parable about a common need we all have. It's really the need to impress and be affirmed and wanted and needed and loved, and well, surely there's nothing wrong with that, right? Well, Jesus would say it depends on how you go about filling that need, and most of us get it wrong. Today, Jesus offers a new way of looking at this need that we all have to be seen and loved. A reading from Luke chapter 14. One Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee, he was being watched carefully. And when he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor. For a person more distinguished than you may have been invited, and if so, the host will invite both of you to come and say to you, give this person your seat. And then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you're invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, friend, move up to a better place. Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. There's a song I've been singing this week, and the first line is, I'll never be any more loved than I am right now. And I think it captures one of the main themes that Jesus teaches again and again and again. I think it's really at the heart of many of his parables and his teachings. And it's not just a case of not only will you not be loved any more than you are right now, but you can also exchange that word for love. You can say like, you could say acceptance. You could say God isn't going to accept you any more tomorrow than God accepts you today. God isn't going to forgive you any more tomorrow or next year or whenever in the future. God isn't going to do any more than what God's done today. And it's the whole idea that we're complete in God. God loves us. God forgives us. Or if we can't get our heads around love, likes us. In fact, it even says that God cherishes us. Can you imagine that? That God cherishes you? Yeah, it's one of the promises of Scripture, that you are cherished or precious, honored in my sight, and I love you. One of the promises of God. It's hard to receive this kind of teaching, that we have absolutely everything now that we need from God, and that God isn't withholding anything from us, and that there's nothing that we have to do or work at or strive to actually receive more. Very hard for us to get our heads around it. I don't know if you can get your head around it, actually. I think it's something that you have to experience little by little. It's a little bit like having a new puppy or a cat, a kitten, or a baby. It's a little bit, I'm using, of course, I'm anthropomorphizing God, right? I mean, I have to do that. We have to attribute human behaviors to God so that we can try and understand, get an idea of what God is like. Actually, Jesus did this too. Remember in the Lord's Prayer, he says, when you pray, pray our Father. Well, he's anthropomorphizing God so that we can try and grasp some of these concepts of a much deeper, bigger reality. So anyway, I was saying it's a little bit like a puppy, or a little bit like I relate to puppies, but some of you relate to babies. When that baby comes into family, what does the baby do in order to get you to love the baby? Nothing, right? They're just so sweet and cute and beautiful, little bundles of joy. I mean, what do they actually do? Well, no, you just say, well, they don't really do anything. They just are. They're just beings. It's like when you pick up your new puppy, they're just like little pups. They're just there. They're just being puppies or being babies. And you love them because of that. It's not because they do anything, right? Well, in the same way, Jesus said, God, similar to a good parent. You're not loved because you're doing something, right? You're not forgiven because you're doing something to get forgiven. It's a gift. It's a gift. That's why it's all called grace. But I think the reason that it's so difficult for us to receive this at a deeper level is because we live in a world where absolutely everything is earned. And it starts at a very, very young age when we go to school. When we're tiny little kids and we go to school, and really that's where we start to, go through the tests, pass or fail. And then we get a little bit older and we go to work and we either get promoted or don't get promoted. And then, we're always jumping through hoops because it's the way the world works. You don't get anything unless you go for it. And the problem comes, that's the way the world works. There's a lot of striving and grasping, but the problem comes when we assume that God works the same way as the world does. The problem comes when we assume that our spiritual lives, our inner life, is similar to the world, and Jesus teaches it's absolutely nothing like the world at all. The things that give you status and value in the world's eyes, things like position, profession, where you live, how much money you have, how many toys you have, all these things, how you look externally. All these things give you value in the world's eyes, but for Jesus, actually Jesus really isn't particularly interested in any of these things. The only time Jesus ever speaks about things like materialism and money and what we have, it's usually in connection with, so good you have it, so learn how to share it. It's nothing about value. So, in fact, he says that you can gain the whole world and lose your soul. In other words, it's possible to live in such a way that you're always striving and you're always going for something and you're always trying to grasp something and you're always got your goals, but you can still end up quite empty at the end, or in the end. When you stop and reflect, you can end up kind of empty and something's not quite right, you're coming up short. And Jesus would say, yeah, because the world can't give you what you really, truly need at a deeper level. The world can only satisfy you so much and so far. It can only do so much for you. So this teaching is, it begins, so the context is that Jesus is at this dinner party, and he's the host is a prominent religious leader. And Jesus is looking at the guests, and they're all coming toward the table, and they're all trying to vie for the best seats. Now, in those days, 2,000 years ago, the table was U-shaped, and the host would sit in the middle of the U. So the best seat, meaning the most prestigious seat, would be right next to the host, at the center of that U. And Jesus notices that everyone is sort of pushing forward and trying to get that best seat. And when he sees that, he gives them a parable, when he notices that. And the parable basically is, Luke 14, he basically says, I just read it, He says, when he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, important places, he gave them a parable, and he said, when you're invited by someone to a wedding banquet, don't sit down in the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come and say to you, give this person your place. And then in disgrace, you'll have to move to another chair. But he says, instead, when you're invited, go sit down at the lowest place. And when your host comes, he'll say, friend, move up higher. And then the sort of key line is, for all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. So it's a little bit like, have you ever had the misfortune of being invited to, actually it can happen at a party, but it can happen in any group setting where people are trying to impress one another. I'm sure you've all experienced this at one time or another. You're with people and they are basically networking or showing off or trying to impress, maybe make some business connections or drop names to make sure that you know they're well connected and that they're doing very well. It's usually about money and who owns what and who knows who and what toys they have, and you know, that's the environment. Actually, it's been a long time since I've been at one of these parties. I seem to be able to steer away from these crowds nowadays, which is a good thing. But I know in the past, you know, certainly I have been around people that are all pointing to their own achievements and their self and how great they are. Really tedious. So the same thing happened in Jesus' day. Of course, people being people. Same thing happened in Jesus' day. And it happened to be in a household of a religious leader. So it can happen in church circles too, right? So this happens in religious institutes, it happens in schools, it happens in businesses, it happens in family settings, can happen within friendships, but chances are you're not going to keep that friend too long if there's too much competition between the two of you. Jesus notices this, and he addresses this, what I would maybe call, it's a need to impress, and it's a need to win favor. I think I'm going to go with this whole idea of there's something in this parable that when you're trying to get to that seat, you're trying to win favor from someone in some way. You want their approval. You want them to like you. You want them to think well of you. And it causes you to say things or do things that you might not necessarily do, because you're motivated to try and please that person for some benefit that you think you're going to get from that. Now, Jesus would say, why are you trying to win her favor? Why are you trying to win his favor? Why is this so important to you? That would be worthwhile stopping and reflecting. Why do you need that? Why is this so important to be liked or appreciated or seen as valued? Why is this so very important to you? So it's when you're invited to the banquet, don't sit down in the place of honor. Don't take the highest place. Now, this is nothing about good manners, right? This isn't a lecture on good manners. Don't push in because it's rude. This is a bigger, deeper need that people have. He's showing us that we have a built-in need to feel important, to feel valued and appreciated. And this need can show itself in many, many, many different ways. And actually, the old biblical word is pride. But this need can show itself in so many different ways. Yes, it can look like one-upmanship. It can look like being very competitive. It can look like the need to be right. It can look like being pushy, but it's not always that way. It can show itself in other ways too. Pride can be very subtle. It can look like an attitude that says, if I wasn't in this family, it would fall apart. I'm holding the whole thing together. Or a relationship. If I wasn't holding this relationship together, it would collapse. Or if I wasn't holding this business together, or this church together, or whatever, it would collapse. Jesus would say, maybe not, maybe not, maybe not. Humility, he speaks about the need to cultivate humility. It's really not that easy to get this balance because we tend to fall into two errors. Some of us, and you'll know people like this, inflate themselves. So they're always stressing that they're more than they actually are. So that's one way to deal with, need and inadequacy. Is to go around, inflating yourself. But then there's other people, the other side is people who tend to undervalue themselves. And undervaluing, we call that low self-esteem, that can also trip you up too, in a different way. So if we inflate ourselves, then we think that we're better than other people, we're more important, we're more likely to be critical, we're more likely to start pushing our weight around a bit to get what we need. If we undervalue ourselves, then we're trying to please everyone around us, or we're trying to please at least one person, right? If not everyone. There's certainly some people in our radar that we're desperately trying to please so that we'll feel worthwhile, filled, adequate. And then Jesus comes along with a completely different perspective. And it's like he's saying, whether you see yourself as someone who inflates themselves and you have a need to push ahead, or whether you see yourself as someone you tend to undervalue yourself, both sets of people are assuming that they need something from out there, something extra to make them okay. So it doesn't really matter if you are, if you're undervaluing yourself, I can't do this and I'm no good at this and low self-esteem. Yeah, well, that gets you into a lot of trouble. And so does the other way of pushing on ahead, striving. That gets you into a lot of trouble too. Jesus would say, actually, you're both looking at this from the wrong perspective. And perspective is so very important. It's the key to our beliefs, our perspective. An old writer, William Temple, said, this is a quote on humility. He said, humility doesn't mean thinking less of yourself than other people. And humility doesn't mean having a low opinion of your gifts. Humility is freedom from thinking about yourself one way or the other. You're just free. You're free. You're not always assessing how you're coming over or how you're doing or if you're good enough or if you're not good enough. You're not even thinking about it. You're just living and doing the best you can do before God and people. That's it. That's it. And the temptation is for us to either inflate or undervalue. That would be the temptation. And then Jesus comes along and says, yeah, well, both, whatever side you happen to fall on, you're thinking that you're needing something else that's out there that you can somehow find. And whatever side you fall on, it's like Jesus comes along and says, okay, what if you already have what you need? What if you already have it? What if you already have a place at the table? What if you are already chosen? What if you're already loved? What if you're already forgiven? What if you have all these things in God's eyes? There's nothing lacking at all. Would that make a difference if that penny dropped and you had God saying, you're completely acceptable as you are, loved, forgiven, and honored and precious in my eyes? Do you think that might lessen our need to play the games of this world? No, I think it would. I think this is what Jesus is getting at here. I think he's saying, and indirectly, you don't need to do that. You don't need to impress anyone. When you have Almighty God already impressed, so to speak, already loving you and accepting you as you are right this minute, saying you're complete, you have everything you need, you can hold your head up, you can get on with your life, you can live in freedom. Do you really care that much about what this one says or that one says? Or do you really need to strive and push your way ahead and show everyone that you're important when you already have everything? See, that's the place that Jesus is coming from. He's starting with the stance that you already have everything you need. Now, we might not necessarily believe that. We might not necessarily live that way. The challenge would be, the growth point in our spiritual life would be to begin to live into that new truth and that new reality. And that becomes the prayer. See? That becomes the prayer. And the heart cry is like, God, help me to receive the fact that I'll never be more loved than I am right now. That I'm already loved, I'm already chosen, I've already got my place at the table. I already belong. Amen. I'll never be more loved than I am right now. Wasn't holding you up. There's nothing I can do to let you down. Doesn't take a trophy to make you proud. I'll never be more loved than I am right now. Jireh, you are enough. Jireh, you are enough. I will be content in every circumstance. through a storm, but I won't look down. I hear your voice carry the rhythm that calls me out. You would cross an ocean so I wouldn't drown. You've never been closer than you are right now. Jireh, you are enough. Jireh, you are enough. I will be content in every circumstance. Jireh, you are enough. I don't want to forget how I feel right now. On the mountaintop, I see so clear what it's all about. Stay by my side when the sun goes down. I don't want to forget